negation of
Unmuted.
complete negation of all forms of intercession are mentioned in the surah, in these verses.
Muted.
Now,
Unmuted.
Now, obviously, it's a puzzle. On the one hand, this is what the Quran is saying, but on the other, what we see is that prayer for intercession is very popular. Now, the reason is that the very next verse, that is Ayatul Kursi, probably the most famous verse, the verse of the throne. It says, "Man zal lazi yashfa'u indahu illa bi izni." Who is there who can intercede before him except by his leave? That is, the Quran is now giving some kind of a possibility that there could be some intercession that might help in people getting successful in the life hereafter. Now, obviously, the Quran is God's word. It has no contradictions. One of the reasons why the Quran says a reader should feel confident that it's God's book is the fact that it is free from all contradictions. Why then should one not believe that a mention in verse 254, where there is a complete negation of the possibility of intercession, as indeed it is there in the earlier two verses in the same chapter, why should these statements not be considered contradicting the very next verse, where it states that some kind of intercession indeed is going to be possible? Well, let's move on. And one of the things that I would like to assure you is that the Quran, if read properly and deeply, with deep reflection, to begin with, you might find that you are getting a bit confused. You might find that there are apparent contradictions here and there. But thereafter, when you take the reading of the Quran seriously, you come to the realization that what you thought was a contradiction was not a contradiction after all. It was some point that you had missed. It was some aspect of the presentation that you were not conscious of. So what we find, if we move on to some of the other verses relevant to the subject of the Quran, what we find is that in the 78th chapter in Surah An-Naba, verse 38, the Almighty is talking about the life hereafter and mentioning the fact that in the life hereafter, La yatakallamun, people are not going to speak before him. Illa man azina lahu rahman, except for the one whom the gracious God is going to permit, waqala sawaba, and he is going to say what is true, what is correct. So, in other words, the Quran is mentioning the fact that even though there is going to be no intercession in the real sense, some intercession is going to be possible, and that is going to be allowed by the Almighty to some people who, when they're going to speak, they will speak what's true. And one more mention is relevant in the Quran, which is 23rd verse of the 34th chapter, that is Surah Saba, verse 23, wherein the Almighty is saying that no intercession is going to help anyone except the person for whom intercession is going to be allowed. So these are the different mentions in the Quran that have got to be attempted to be reconciled. A, no intercession at all. B, some intercession by the leave and permission of the Almighty. C, nobody shall be allowed to speak on the judgment day except whom the compassionate God is going to allow. And D, nobody is going to benefit from intercession except the one for whom permission is going to be granted for getting benefit through intercession. Now, what does this all mean? I'm just going to attempt to give an explanation. You may or may not agree with it, but the answer to this puzzle that comes to one's mind is that the Almighty is telling us that, look here, on the day of judgment, everybody is going to be treated on the principle of justice, equity. There's going to be no partial treatment of some to the exclusion of others. Everyone is going to get the same fair treatment by the Almighty. And therefore, there's no chance, there's no possibility of anyone getting outside help in the form of intercession. That's what the principle is. That's how it's going to be on the judgment day. However, God is not just fair. God is compassionate as well. God, the compassionate God, Ar-Rahman, will decide that although on the day of judgment, the minimum expectation from an individual's performance was of a certain level, He will bring down that level, the threshold, to a lower level. You know, like in the good old days of ours, when we used to study, the pass percentage used to be 40 in a subject. But if somebody was able to, a student was able to bag 33% marks, he was eligible for grace marks. The teacher could exercise his privilege by declaring him as successful. It seems that quite the same way the Almighty is going to allow, after the decision for those who would finally succeed, He is also going to allow the bar of minimum passing marks to come down. So from 40%, just giving the example, it's going to come down to 33%. Now, for these people who would now be eligible to succeed, their success is not going to be announced, it's not going to be in the same manner, it's not the same category of success. It is going to be accompanied by intercession, to be done by the people whom God would pick and would ask them to intercede, and they would say nothing except what God would say to them to state. And these people are going to be the ones who would be identified by God Himself, because they are going to be the ones who will have a certain minimum level which will already have been lowered to meet the minimum expectation. Why would those people who would be asked to intercede be asked to do the job? Because the Almighty would like to give them the honor and the privilege of being those special people who would be instrumental, who would be used by the Almighty in His process of forgiving some people. That really means that in order for one to be eligible to get intercession, one has to work, one has to struggle and reach a minimum mark. This intercession will not negate what has been mentioned in the 3 verses of Al-Baqarah, that there is going to be no intercession. The negation in those verses is the negation of intercession which will cause a person who has failed to pass, a person in our example who has bagged only 15% marks to be able to succeed. That possibility is not there at all. If there is any possibility, it's based on the performance of the individual, but the performance not being up to the mark to be able to get the minimum marks to succeed on his own. It's going to be based on a process which is going to involve intercession. Now, that being the case, there is no reason why we should pray for intercession. We should pray for success without intercession, because intercession, its process is going to entail difficulties, a long waiting period. God knows, maybe some dip in the hell before being lifted through intercession. That is exactly what you learn from the ahadith, the narratives that are talking about intercession. But I don't have now time to talk about them. I have now done with my second part of the presentation as well. I'm extremely sorry, I think it's primarily my inability to understand the technicalities and intricacies of the system of internet, etc., that caused the presentation to be disturbed. But I hope that you heard some part of my presentation. Now I am available for your questions if there are any.
Khalid, I don't feel bad. I think it was me, not you.
Well, I think it was mutual. We were both involved. So, questions?
Muted. Unmuted.
It's our time for question hour answer. If anybody has a question, I don't see anybody raising any hand.
That's always a good sign.
You can even post a question, Khalid. I have two questions on. I have one question from Kashif Khan. So last week presentation was not complete because there was some glitch on our service provider, and we are checking if they can retrieve the missed part of the presentation. If we were able to get it, we will send an email with the complete presentation. They're still trying to recover the lost part of the presentation from the last week, Kashibai. And then, Khalid, there was a question from Sajid Yaqub Saab that if he can send you an email directly.
Oh yes, he's most welcome. He's most welcome, but I don't know whether you like the idea or not. I would welcome the idea, but I am a WhatsApp man. If you would send me a WhatsApp message, I probably would be more comfortable. Somehow my email address is invaded by many emails which are unwanted. So if you could make note of my mobile number, WhatsApp number, I would prefer. But obviously, if you feel more comfortable sending me an email, that too is okay. Should I write it?
So for your email, azmorid@gmail.com.
That's right.
And then I can share your mobile number, which is 335-494.
That's
4936.
Right. That's right. But obviously preceded by the customary other +92.
Yes.
No.
Correct.
Unmuted. Unmuted.
I was trying to unmute if anybody has a question, but then there was some noise, so I unmuted everyone. So if somebody raises a question, I will unmute their mic. But I don't see anybody raising any question. So since we are already at on the dot of our time, should we conclude today's presentation?
Right.
Oh, sorry, Taj Khan has a question.
Okay.
So let me. Taj Khan, you have to unmute your own mic. Is self-muted?
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
My question is that you talked about intercession, and with respect to the prophets, I think they can intercede on your behalf if Allah permits them. But there are common belief that these other awliya Allahs, these very learned people, with those people who have provided a great service.
You see, once the principle is clear, we can understand all the other details and other possibilities as well. There is nothing that would stop us from accepting that people other than prophets can also intercede for others, provided the principle that this intercession is not going to enable an individual who otherwise didn't deserve, because of him or her not getting the bare minimum marks, and yet is going to succeed. So if you are able to achieve that minimum threshold that is going to be brought lower because of the Almighty's mercy, it could be the prophets, it could be some other pious people, etc. But the important thing is, the important message is that don't bank your hopes on intercession. You see, what happens is, psychologically, that if you somehow are confident that some individual, somebody other than God will be instrumental in enabling you to succeed despite your otherwise poor performance, undeserving for you to succeed, instead of focusing your attention on doing well as a human, as a Muslim, the individual is going to focus her attention on pleasing that non-God, person, being, whether a human or an angel or whatever. The Quran is very emphatic in stating that those who bank upon their hopes on false intercession don't believe in the life hereafter. Because if your hope is on intercession, then the life hereafter and its fear, the apprehension of standing before God for accountability will not deter you from doing wrong. Why? Because you think that you've got strong connections, and those connections are going to come to your rescue despite your poor performance. So the Quran says, "Innal ladhina yasummuna al-malaikata tasmiyata al-untha," those who name angels after females, la yu'minuna bil akhirah, they don't believe in the hereafter. The people of Mecca, they had feminine names for angels, because their understanding was that these angels are the daughters of God, and God would not refuse, would not reject what they would ask them to do, because they are God's favorites. So that kind of an intercession is what has been completely rejected by the Almighty in His statement in Surah Al-Baqarah. But there is going to be some intercession which is going to be based on the principles of both justice and mercy. So anybody can do it, provided if the basic principle is not compromised. I hope it answers.
I have shared your WhatsApp number with the whole group, today's group.
That's great.
And I'm still sending your email just in case if somebody will still prefer to send you the email instead. And I'm going to go ahead and share with everyone. I hope, Kashif, Khansab, your question was addressed and there are directly quick question, or if you want to ask any question directly, you have to unmute your mic. Your mic is self-muted. But I've tried to, I think he will send you directly.
Okay.
He has some question about, there's an article on the Mother Jones called The Stealth Crusader.
Okay.
And he wants your comments, but I think he was asking your WhatsApp number.
Right.
So
fine.
the question,
Inshallah. Fine.
I hope I'm not missing anybody's. Sure. Yeah, he's just said thanks. So I think we should just conclude today's session with your permission, Khalid.
Thank you very much. Most certainly.
Thank you, everyone. Inshallah, see you next Saturday. Assalamu alaikum.
Right. Okay, my number is, let me write it. My number is +92. There you are. Now, my mercy shall always prevail over my wrath is a Jewish saying, exactly what the first hadith Qudsi. If this is so, there should be no need for intercession. Well, intercession and God's mercy are not at odds with each other. Intercession is going to be one way of exercising God's mercy, one method through which He is going to show His mercy. That's why it says in Surah An-Naba 78, Illa man azina lahu Rahman, except those whom the compassionate God Rahman is going to permit. So God's mercy and intercession are not at odds with each other. So, and the Quran also says, وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, and my mercy, it overwhelms everything else. That is, I have all the good attributes that I possess, but my mercy is the most predominant. So it's His mercy that is going to be expressed in the form of intercession as well. The intercession is not going to be something exercised other than God's mercy in ways which are going to ignore His mercy. It's God's mercy that is going to find its expression in the form of intercession. I hope it's clear. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.